Hello, and welcome to another segment of Hot Topics. My name is John Massero, and I'm excited tonight to be here with Jim Lettiere, who is our Town Council President, Tony Marino, our Town Manager, and Lisa Howard, our School Superintendent. And tonight we're going to talk about the upcoming election in regards to Winthrop, which is the Proposition 2.5 override question that you will see on the ballot. Welcome, folks.
Welcome.
Thanks.
Nice to see you, John.
Thank you for coming down and having an opportunity to talk about the 2.5 override. So at first, can we just talk about the difference between what a Proposition 2.5 override is versus what we've had in the past, which is a debt exclusion? Anybody want to tackle that?
Sure, I'll talk about that a little bit. So an override is something that's going to be continuous. It's going to affect your taxes year after year after year at the same level. A debt exclusion is paying for an asset that you're building, right? In a school, a fire station, police station, whatever it happens to be. And once the asset is paid off, that comes off the books, off the tax rolls.
Right, and we just had that happen, didn't we, with some of the schools?
Yeah, two of the schools we built in the early 2000s, the Fort Bank School and the ATC, they both came off the tax rolls 2 and 4 years ago, respectively. So those buildings are now paid off.
Right, and the high school is into, I believe, its 8th year of.
Yeah, the high school. The next debt exclusion coming off will be Miller Field, and that will be coming off in 2030. And then in 2040, the middle high school comes off. So
Right.
Miller Field comes off, and it's kind of funny. Miller Field actually cost the town more money than Fort Bank School or the ATC because of reimbursement. So it will be relatively substantial give back in 2030 when it comes off.
So the point is that those came off because they're the debt exclusion, but the 2.5 override is to increase that tax levy permanently.
Correct.
And right now, it's because currently the town can go over 2.5% in their tax increase on a yearly basis.
Correct.
Which was, of course, brought back in 1981. I remember that year very well. Graduated high school, but was one of the last high school classes, though, to get through before all of that happened with the 2.5. And there was a lot of changes that had occurred. So when was the last override vote that Winthrop has done?
The last tax override vote was 2009.
2009. So
Yes.
we're talking
15 years.
15 years.
Yeah.
And at that vote, I recall that vote, we had a menu item
Yes.
of multiple events that included all town and schools.
Correct.
Right. So this is just primarily for the schools.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay. And what can you want to talk a little about, Superintendent, on what the request is?
Sure. The request is for $4.5 million, and that request was made based on projections for FY26. So for the past, several years, 7 that I can speak of as I enter my 8th year, the school district has really operated at a below-level service budget. So a level service budget is a level service budget would be everything you had last year, and not adding anything to it, but certainly not taking away. So each year, as everybody knows, we request both a level service budget as well as a budget that we call a needs-based budget, but it's actually really giving our students what we believe they need to be competitive with the other communities around us. So because of the 2.5 override and the amount of revenue that the town takes in, it has been impossible to achieve a needs-based budget request, and then has slowly at least over the past 7 years, been impossible to really achieve a level service budget amount. So we have been funded below level service, which typically equates to reductions. So whether it be reductions in things that we buy or reductions in people who have left us, retirements that we haven't filled, those are the types of things that we've been able to do to sort of manage the budget. That coupled with the use of grant funds that we have. And certainly during COVID, COVID gave us a lot of terrible things, but one of the good things COVID did give us was additional monies to supplement school budgets and put in place everything we needed for COVID and then some. So having those additional resources over the past several years have allowed us to, yes, we had to make some cuts, but to still be able to operate without devastation. Now FY26, we find ourselves with all the COVID money drying up, no longer being available, with the costs of goods and services and employment increasing at a rate higher than 2%, higher than 2.5% at a minimum. We have a structural deficit. So therefore, we are seeking an override
I think
for the schools.
what's important is to point out is that the cities and towns have to stay within that 2.5.
Right,
The vendors do not.
correct.
Right.
People that charge for services, like such as transportation and out-of-district tuitions
Sure.
and all of those. And I just want to also make another clarification on the level service versus what might be a level funded. And so the level service budget is taking what you currently have and you're moving it up. And that's kind of what you're trying to do with this override.
Correct.
Is to continue that service.
Correct.
Because if you were to level fund it and give the same amount of money that you got this year for next year, that would certainly have reductions in place because you would have no choice.
Correct, because the cost of just educational services in general, supplies, materials, heating costs, costs of contracts for copy machines, cost of curriculum contracts that we have. We use a lot of software and online curriculum now. Those costs typically go up higher than 2.5%. Transportation is one of the multiple unfunded mandates that we have been blessed with. And we saw spikes over 10% in transportation. And when we say unfunded, we get minimal money back in reimbursement on transportation. And don't forget, we transport not only students with special needs, but the homeless transportation. So our homeless families have increased significantly during the pandemic, and prior to that with the economic difficulties folks were having. And that's another unfunded mandate in which we have to pay for the transportation of those students to and from school, especially if they're placed in another community and continue to go to school here in Winthrop. And transportation for vocational schools is another large ticket item that increases every year. And the amount of money that we receive as revenue to the community of Winthrop, not going over 2.5%, makes it very difficult to keep up with that. And if you think about your general home budget and everything that has increased, the cost of food, the cost of heat, the cost of electricity, we now assumed all the insurances for the schools and the liability insurance, things like that have also gone over 2.5%. So I think strategically over the last several years, we have done a really good job at maximizing the monies that we have and seeking to maximize any additional resources we have, like revolving accounts, say a preschool tuition account. If there is $50,000 in that account, ideally you'd like to keep that for emergency purposes, having to potentially hire another aide and not have to go back to the town for a supplemental budget. And we have, over the past 15 years since the last override, been able to use those monies to do that. I think we have exhausted just about every resource we have. So when you think about why an override now and why didn't we do this a long time ago? 4 or 5 years ago, we were faced, or 3.5 to 4 years ago, faced with a pandemic. Had we not had that pandemic money, I think at that time we would be in the position we're in now. Going back to the community during a global pandemic to ask people, many of whom weren't working, for a 2.5 override when we had monies from the state and federal government would have been disingenuous. Unfortunately, that certainly extends the amount of money you would need, because the cost of operations have gone up over those 4 years as well.
Right, and as we're learning today, more so now, that our kids who have gone through the COVID era are still struggling with academics, because let's face it, none of us sitting here missed 4 months of school.
Yeah.
And had to go home and learn it through a computer.
Right.
And then none of us here had to start the next year in the same situation.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of time and a lot of
time missed.
For students to lack. And that's being showed right now in the MCAS that are coming out, and that's showing that we're behind, but we're working hard to catch up, and that finance that the federal government and the state was giving was to help in that area, but you can't just stop it and say,
Right.
oh, guess what? They should be better now in 2 or 3 years. This particular group of students, it's going to take this whole cycle for
Absolutely.
those students that started in kindergarten in 2020. Not until 2032 are they going to finally flush out of the system that says,
Right.
okay, this is what helped them.
Right.
So this isn't a 1 year, 2 year. This is a long-term problem that we
Sure.
have to work on to help these students who have gone through some difficult challenges.
Sure. And again, we talk about unfunded mandates all the time, but a lot of the support systems that were put in place because of COVID and because of learning loss and because of the students' social, emotional, and mental health implications that took place, not being in school, many students staying home alone, the economic difficulties that families fell upon during that time, how that impacted students as well. School superintendents and educators, we were very well aware that this was not going to be a 3-year fix. Unfortunately, the financial support was given for 3 years. The students' issues, concerns are still there. We've also had a significant increase in student enrollment over the past few years. We are at 2,008 students. I have some data that we'll have up on the website that gives a history of the years. We had a big drop in students during COVID because some students went to private schools, some students chose homeschool or online schoolwork different than the online schoolwork that they were doing with us. So there was a dip in enrollment, and then last year we were at I think the October 1 report was 1,975 students last school year, and we're at 2,008 right now with 15 students in the queue to be registering. So when we had that money, it was great because we could put together tutoring. So when the MCAS scores are low, you're mandated to provide services to raise those MCAS scores.
I want to stop you for a second and just make sure that people understand mandated. Mandated, when you talk about unfunded mandates, so the mandate is the requirement. It's
Correct.
being required by the state that we have no choice. It's
Correct.
mandated.
Correct.
But the problem is the state's not funding you
Correct.
to do that mandate. The district has to fund that.
Right.
And that's where it becomes even more of a constricting part on top of the district.
Yeah, and over the past 13 years, there's been 103 new unfunded mandates that have come out from the state, from everything from, if we could talk about the Chapter 70 formula, which is, 1,000 years old and doesn't cover anything. You could talk about that for hours, but the additional unfunded mandates that stack up on public schools throughout the years, everything from teacher evaluation requirements, professional development requirements, EL services, homeless transportation, charter school reimbursements, the list goes on and on and on.
So, and that's part of your level service funding as you move forward with that amount
Yes.
that you talked. Did you say 4.5 or 4.9?
4.9.
Sorry, 4.9. I apologize, yes.
So 4.9 is the increase request. So, Mr. Town Manager, what does that look like for the average homeowner if they were to break that down and they support that?
I think the number is 686,000 is the average home value.
689.
689, we base it on that, and I believe it's right around 900.
It's about 935,
Yeah,
and
35,
it's
I don't wanna say the wrong number.
People get confused a little bit with home values, right? And it's
Right.
not because people see homes now $1 million, which is a whole nother subject. But it's your assessed value. So it's the assessed value on the tax bill. The average house in Winthrop is $689,000. Based on that number,
That's where the increase would come in.
The increase would be approximately $930 a year.
And that would be on the homeowner of that.
Correct. That would be the homeowner.
That would,
Correct.
so they would, and then that would be broken up into the quarterly tax
Correct.
bills
Correct.
that
So
we
roughly
receive.
$225, $230.
And I do think it's a good point to make as well, that the 4.9 million that we're asking for initially, 4.9 million is not the deficit that we're predicted to be in. So the deficit we're predicted to be in is about 3.5. So
Okay.
what does that mean? We can talk
Yeah.
about that either now or later, but of that 4.9, approximately 350 3,500,000 would be used for the FY26 operational services of the school department to get us at a pretty much a level service as compared to this year. 1.4 million would be put in a stabilization fund for schools only, not to be used for anything else but a stabilization fund that the following FY27 school year, we would be able to add that money back to the school budget if needed, or if there were any emergencies or additional items that came up, that maybe another unfunded mandate that would come up during the year, we would be able to access that money through the town council.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yes, through the town council.
So I think that that's also very important, so that the vote approves this amount of money. We know that 3.5 is probably the level funded that would be used for next year. The other money that goes into the stabilization, the superintendent or school committee just can't say, oh, let's borrow some of that right now.
Correct.
There's a process, there's an accountability that has to go through the town council.
Correct.
Correct? And how does that work?
Correct. They would come with a request saying it could be an emergency situation, it could be just a supplement to a budget that they need in future years. It also gives the schools the ability to have turnbacks go back into that, to add to that stabilization account. Right. It's been a goal of mine for the last handful of years to try to get an educational stabilization account, right? We have a capital stabilization, we have like a rainy day fund for the town, we have a building stabilization fund. And we have a regular stabilization account. So this would be specifically for the schools. They would come to the council for a request. The council would give the request, give it consideration, vote on it, and then the money would be transferred. So this gives the schools an opportunity to have paybacks at the end of the year that, they might have an account that didn't cost as much money as they thought, and they'd have a give back at the end of the year. They could put it into the stabilization account. So it's an opportunity for them to create a savings account, so in the future this would eliminate the need for subsequent overrides.
And would the town council at some point, if this was established as the future years go on, would they look at the formulas maybe on free cash, that maybe a percentage of that formula might be able to go into the education stabilization?
I've talked about that already, saying that I would like to change our financial policies as to what we do. Right now, we put 30% into one stabilization account, 25% into another, and 10% into building. And I would like to switch them a little bit so we could put a small percentage into the school. So we're also investing. I mean, it's one town, it's one entity, right? So we should also invest. Now this, the money from the override also includes the town, also gives a portion of its new revenues to the school on a yearly basis. It's just, with inflation the way it's been over the last 4 years in particular, it's been pretty substantial, and it's hard on 2.5% when you see gas going up 20% and, everything
Well, I mean,
else
out of
going
district tuition 2 years ago was 14%.
14%.
You're already 11.5% in the hole. I mean, it's like, and the state, to your point earlier, when you talk about the state reimbursement rate, 75% of reimbursement over monies that are over a certain amount of money, which I think is $45,000.
It's 53 as of this year. 53,000.
So and then you're really only getting about 29-30% of that money back in the end, which is difficult. And I do know that according to the, you have the what was the thing, SOA?
Yep, Student Opportunity
Student
Act.
Opportunity Act. They get so confused sometimes on all
Yeah.
these. But the Student Opportunity Act, on paper sounds great, but here again, Winthrop is one of those communities, just like the Melrose, these other communities that, yes, we have to go and do all of this work to say how we would spend that money, but we never qualify for it.
Right.
And so that's part of the problem.
We
And
qualify
that's-
for very few grants compared to our surrounding communities. Winthrop is sitting on its peninsula, but where you can put 1 foot in Revere and 1 foot in Winthrop at the same time, and you can put 1 foot in Winthrop and 1 foot in East Boston at the same time. Right. And when you look at the federal grants and the state grants that are available to those two cities versus what Winthrop gets, it's actually disturbing when you look at it. And important to note, we have a lot of students that transition from Boston Public Schools, Revere, Chelsea, Everett, these communities that get much larger grants to help supplement their budgets. We have a lot of children that transition into Winthrop from these communities daily. The good thing is with our 5-district partnership, from an educational standpoint, we have very similar entry points in terms of curriculum. so our students do well. But when you think about the access to dollars that supplement schools' budgets, it's just another reason that we're really struggling to keep up with the 2.5 levy.
So what happens, I have to ask the question. It doesn't go
Knew it
through.
was coming.
Where are we?
Yeah.
So and it's really, we're at the very beginning of this particular school year, but I know you're also now, we've hit October, so now you
Yeah.
begin the process of
Next
budgeting
year's
fiscal
budget, yeah.
26, right?
Right, yeah.
And so what do you forecast, I guess
Sure,
is the best
sure.
question, of what happens without this 4.9 for that 3.5 to help for next year?
So this is where I wish I had the same reputation as the weathermen on TV, because they can absolutely predict things and they can go totally wrong, and it's okay. In school departments, you don't have that luxury. We spend a lot of time looking and forecasting what the budget dollars that are going to come into the school district, not only from the town side, but more importantly from the government are going to be. Are they going to be higher? Are they going to be lower? I mean, obviously with Chapter 70, I mean, it's been a pretty good tradition that it is very well underfunded, didn't change for, I don't know, John, I think it was 38 years. And then they tweaked it by a hair. And I think they felt like they were, heroes for doing that. And
And I
it
have to
was
say to folks at home, we can't explain to you Chapter 70 right now, because if we did, that would go
need
on for about
5
3
days,
hours.
yeah.
However, you could look it up.
You could look it up.
Under the Department of Ed to
Yeah.
understand truly what Chapter 70 means.
Yeah, so Chapter 70 means it doesn't even come remotely close to covering the cost of education for a
Correct.
child. There's no better definition. So, we look at that. We look to see if any of things of that nature are going to change. I follow very closely all the entitlement grants and the competitive grants. We are very slim in terms of staffing. You're looking at one of the 3 grant writers for the school district, as well as the assistant superintendent and one other individual that helps write these grants. The difficulty with grants, if you watch the track record, they have gone up minimally, but when one goes up, another one goes down. For the grants for the Winthrop Public Schools, just about 85% of the grant monies that we receive, entitlement grants, are paying teachers.
Right.
So if those grants disappeared tomorrow, all those positions would disappear. So in looking at that and sort of looking at the history of things not increasing in value very much, but the cost of living, the cost of goods and services, the cost of salaries increasing at a rate, mind you, our teachers had taken 2%, but if you look at it, the other things are climbing over 2.5. We can forecast pretty much where we're going to be. So without that override money coming in, where most of our budget is staffing and people, and our expense budget without health care insurance and workman's comp and all of that is very, very minimal. Those are fixed costs. So you can't eliminate fixed costs. You can't eliminate what it costs for staff. You can't eliminate what it costs for contracts that you already have. But what we would have to do is take a look at staffing. And class size right now across the elementary schools is in the low 20s, which is very good. I like to tie it to the increase in our student achievement. And when the MCAS scores are revealed to the public, I believe some are being mailed home today to the elementary, you'll see a dramatic increase in our math scores because of our investment in data-driven curriculum that we have been able to invest in over the past few years with grant funding and some of the COVID mitigation monies. And we've changed our focus and target on math and reading and ELA with our new bookworms curriculum. Some of those costs are fixed. What's not fixed is class size.
Right.
In the general education arena, in special education, there are laws and regulations that you have to follow. So I foresee, without an override, some dramatic reduction in staffing. You have to understand that we don't have a lot of senior staff left. We do have a lot of new teachers. Now that we have assumed control or management of unemployment insurance, for every person who loses a position, you have to factor in unemployment. So I do see reduction K-12 in staffing. The general impact of that is, larger class size leads to, less attention to learning within the classroom setting. Certainly, an increase in fees right now. I think we were on sort of a honeymoon with the fees, with the monies that came in through COVID to provide lots of student, recovery programs, before school programs, after school programs, tutoring services for students. I think those things, may be a thing of the past, unless parents are paying fees for those. I also see increase in other co-curricular fees. So co-curricular activities are activities that are not extra. And I think people need to really hear that. Co-curricular, meaning athletics, is not something that should be an extra for kids. It's part of the full child. And it's part of the ability for a child to grow and learn and become interested in things and become an active member of this global society.
I don't think there's anybody here who would
Yeah.
disagree that we shouldn't even have fees for those
Yeah,
areas.
and-
They're part of that continuation of a child's education.
Right.
So-
It is. And, again, Chapter 70, if they're listening, that would be a nice thing for them to continue to give us more money through Chapter 70 to fund those, so we didn't have to charge fees. So right now,
So
we
it's-
charge minimal fees, but I see those fees going up without the override.
So I
How
think
much,
what's
I don't know
important
yet.
to, what's important to point out here that you're doing is the fact that, yes, if the override doesn't pass, we see that there's going to be some significant issues moving forward with the budget.
Absolutely.
Specifics, we can't give you those yet because we
Not
don't know
numbers.
what's happening
Right.
from the state yet.
Right. Not total numbers, but as the person who has to make that decision in a relatively fast time frame, I do have to sit back and sort of project multiple scenarios.
Right, which you're doing.
Yeah, I am. It's not fun. I wish I didn't have to do it. I think some of the other things that are important to understand is, we have made a lot of progress. We have put a lot of technology in our schools. Technology is the future and is the way schools are functioning now. Even with curriculum, we need technology to access our curriculum that are, web-based curriculums for our students. I foresee the inability to either add new technology or even maintain the technology that we have. We're a one-to-one school district now, which is, I believe, that's what students are entitled to. The cost to fix and replace Chromebooks and smartboards that we have, the cost of online curriculum, I foresee that being a major challenge to keep up with.
That's another vendor that just keeps increasing
Yeah.
beyond the 2.5.
Beyond,
Go ahead.
Just
Let
and
you
last
finish
thing,
that.
reduction of instructional materials. I foresee, without an override, a potential freeze on, purchasing any new curriculum, investing in any new professional development or student support services, minimizing, the impact that COVID has had or that life has had on our students and the needs we have. We have seen a dramatic increase in the Winthrop Public Schools of students with medical needs. We are a school district that prides ourselves on keeping our kids within our school community. One, the cost is cheaper to keep your kids here than it is to have them go to an out-of-district placement, which includes transporting kids to that placement. But we have seen a significant increase in the health and medical needs. Lots of kids with asthma, which we hadn't seen in the past, a dramatic increase. Dramatic increase in kids with diabetes, kids with feeding tubes, students who have these complex medical needs that require day-to-day nursing. And so, those are things that we have no choice but to
Right.
address.
Right.
But I do see, a freeze on doing things that we would normally do, the purchasing of materials, supplies, and anything new that we may need for students, maybe not mandatory, but definitely beneficial for our students to make progress.
So let's talk about the process then. So this question is on the ballot. That it's not just the presidential election in Winthrop. This is
Yep.
also, you want to just touch base on, there's 4 questions from the state, and then there's this question.
5, right? I think there's 5 questions.
5 questions
Five
from
questions from the state, and then this is the 6th question. The last one on the ballot will be for the override.
Okay. And do we know, do we have to flip the ballot over yet? Do we know any of those things?
The ballot's going to be 2 pages.
Okay, so that's important for people to realize
So when
that.
someone goes in, they're going to give their name and address, they're going to get 2 ballots. The first ballot will be, the first side of the first ballot will be your typical presidential, senators, state election. Turn over the first page and there'll be questions 2, 3, and 4 with pretty long explanations, state questions.
right.
The second page, or the third page, however you want to look at it, the second full page, the front of the second page will have questions 5 and 6 from the state, and then our question. 5 from the state, and then our question. Our question, again, is very straightforward. We are giving strict guidelines as to what we can say, and basically it says, do you support a $4.5 million override?
4.9.
Sorry.
$4.9 million override for the Winthrop Public Schools. So that's the last item on the ballot. So it is a multiple page ballot. It's important to understand that, and the Winthrop question is the last question on the ballot.
So I think what's the other part, thank you for clarifying that too, but, you know, I'm resident in the town. I don't have any students anymore in the school district. Why would I support this? Why would I vote for this? I know my answers of why, but I just want to throw that out there as we say, to why should everybody come out and support this?
I mean, it's a community, right? I mean, where everybody, it's any community that's, maintains real estate values and is worthwhile community and a place where people desire to go to live. There's multiple components, right? It's a well-run town government. It's a well-run school system. It's are your roads maintained well? Do you have public safety buildings and things like that are new and you're upkeeping them? I mean, that's all part and parcel. I mean, everybody sort of, it's a circle of life, right? But we all go around the thing. We all have kids in school and we pay, and then we don't have kids in school and we're still, we're responsible for that.
So the key there, which I appreciate you pointing out, is, it's really important for your real estate value.
Right.
It's to show that we are a community that invests in our education, that invests in our public service, that does all of these types of things. So that's why, whether you have children or not in the district, whether you have children that are going to other schools, you still want to have that resale value that's really important. And I think that, it is hard. Let's face it, it's hard. We're all going through difficulties with, the budgets, and we're all, as you stated earlier, we're faced with the budget problems with the schools, but there are budget issues that homeowners have and all of those things. But in the end, we are trying to build this community of Winthrop and invest into the needs that we need.
Yeah, and I think, as the daughter of a former realtor and as a homeowner in Winthrop and as the parent of still a child in Winthrop and 3 who have gone through the school system, and now a grandmother, somebody who will be having somebody going into kindergarten in 2 years, when I reflect back on the value of public education, the value in keeping kids engaged after school hours and what that does for your community. Because the longer students are in school, the more activities they have to participate in, the more structured they are, and the more well-rounded they are as a human when you meet them in CVS, when you meet them at the bank, when you have kids out in the community valuing property and understanding, the relationship and what you've been taught in school about how to take care of your own property. The less time spent in school because there are no after-school activities. Sports are limited because they're costly. Co-curricular activities are limited because they're costly. Now you have students out in the community that are not busy, that are not well-rounded because they haven't had that opportunity to be coached by people beyond an 8 to 2:30 cycle. As an adult now, sort of finding myself realizing I'm starting to get old, I also would like the humans of the next generation to be able to contribute to society in a very well-educated manner. And that's very hard to do when you're giving the minimum. When you give the minimum, the end result is the minimum. And I would like the people who are going to take care of me when I retire from this to be those who are well-educated, well-rounded, and who love their community and treat their community as they have been treated as students. Yeah. So I think that's really important for those people who really don't have kids in the community. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but it's not just about paying for schools. It's about paying for your future.
It's an investment in
It's
the
an
community.
investment,
And I
yeah.
think
Exactly.
you've pointed that out well. And I will say this to you, that when your grandchild goes to kindergarten, I'm sure you're going to be a great show and tell for your grandchild to come in and be introduced.
Yeah, I may be a school committee member by then.
And you got to remember, Prop 2.5 was never meant to. It wasn't like it was a mandate to live within 2.5%.
Correct.
It was to give control back to the communities. That's all it was. It was so elected leaders couldn't go crazy and raise your taxes, way above what the norm would be, to pay for services or pet programs or whoever happens to be in office. And that's fine, but it was never meant that. And nobody, they never expected us to live within 2.5. I mean, just inflation alone. I mean, look what happened in the 80s and what's happened in the last 3 or 4 years. Like, that kind of inflation, you can't live within 2.5. So you're seeing more and more. And then the other half of this, and the other problem is, what puts pressure on my departments is, a lot of the stuff, the maintenance on water mains and roadways and public safety buildings, all that stuff got kicked down the road over the years, because they could, right? And no, it's not, there's no water coming out of the ground right now, so we're okay, we can wait and do that. And all of that sort of coming to a head at the same time. So we realize it's a burden, and we all know that, but this is necessary. And I came from a community where, they had this similar setup, right? It was, every 5 to 7 years they'd come back and ask for an override for the schools, and it was, fairly routine. Once you get built up, the number gets a little less. But, the Education Stabilization Fund really helps. Like, it allows you to take, like, if you're projecting it lasts 3 or 5 years or whatever the number is, that Education Stabilization Fund allows you to extend that, whether it's a year or 2 years or 3 years, depending upon, how diligent they can be, and turn backs and maybe some extra state grants. Like, that's all going to play into this. So we're going to be as great stewards of the money, and I know Lisa will be, and I promise you I will be, we both will be, and we talk almost daily about the budget and expenses and whether it's health insurance, whatever. But I want everyone to understand, like, we're going to do the best we can with the money, but it's just, you can't, like you said, it should have been years ago and maybe before COVID, but COVID allowed us to delay.
But I mean, it's also, I applaud you folks for the work that you've done, knowing that we haven't done it in 15 years,
Right.
and the struggles that you've had to go through in order to make sure and to put the best product that you could put on the table.
Sure.
But at this point, you've really hit that point now
A
where
critical juncture.
we
Yeah.
just, it's that
For
fork in the
sure.
road where we need to move forward, and
We're not
we
unique.
need help.
I think
Right.
the community needs to know that, Winthrop is not unique, and the increase in the need for overrides in communities across the Commonwealth has risen dramatically in the past 15 years.
Right.
And most folks are going out
Well-
for overrides every 5 to 7 years.
I was in a
Right.
community last year that tried to do an override at the end in June. It was not successful. We did have to have at least 20 layoffs. But part of why it wasn't successful, too, on top of it, was they had done one in 2019.
Right,
So
right.
you can see that they had increased and did, but then all of a sudden COVID hit.
Yep.
And it took a lot. And so now you're coming back 4 years later saying, yeah, but we need this.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that community is going to go back and have to go and ask, because I don't know how they're going to continue to move forward without something that's going to change. But that's the point. So in 2009, I remember that time frame, and we, this community came together and realized this is what it needed to happen. And now here we are 15 years later, but 4 of those years ago, we got hit with COVID on
Right.
top of it all. And yet, this is the first time you're coming here
Right.
with that question. I know we've had debt exclusions,
Yep.
that we've brought forward, and we've looked at those, and those have, some have been very successful, but this is a pivotal time.
Yeah. And I think it's, give due diligence where it needs to be. There's a lot of people that work on the school's budget. Principals, administrators, teachers, parents give their input, and we have tried not to have to go for a 2.5 override, because like everybody else, we're all human, and we're all living the, the stress of constant increases in everything. So I think, reflecting back, it was a lot of work not to have to come for an override. And I know that it's a blow to people when you say, $900 for a homeowner over a time frame. It is a lot of money, but there's been several years that we haven't.
But there have been things that you have done that have helped be able to not have to go for that
Sure.
override at that moment.
Sure.
Like freezing the budget when you needed to do
Sure.
it, to try to make sure that those purchases that you needed to have happened would, because I'm on the finance,
Yep,
I've heard
yep.
you have those conversations.
Residency alone, residency
Right, so you
enforcement.
thought
Yeah.
about those as you moved forward, and you had that long-term planning
Yep.
thought process. So that's an asset.
Yeah.
You're an asset to the community by thinking of that. But now, and you're coming to the community saying,
My
I
strategic
can-
plan has hit a wall.
exactly, I
You know,
can
and
continue
it will
to do
need to
this,
be
but
rebuilt.
I've hit what I can hit now.
Right,
And
right.
so now we need to bring up that ante again.
And we'll continue to strategically plan with that money. So I think we got this far by strategic planning and how to utilize the funds that we have. I think moving forward, strategic plan number 2 needs to come into effect so that, you know, we can continue to communicate to the community where we're at. Not a lot of people watch school committee meetings, not a lot of people come to finance meetings. I happen to live it. You happen to live it. You both live it. So we understand where the pennies have gone, where the dollars have gone, where we have strategically managed the money. This is not a shock to us, but we have done as much as we could to make the money last as long as we possibly could. This is the first time in my tenure as a superintendent, which I'm in my 8th year now, that I have a major concern. We've always been able to sort of figure things out, whether it's writing another grant or, you know, the town council has been very generous at times in being able to give us a supplement to our budget, whether it's $20,000 or whether it's $150,000. It's typically for what we need. And knowing that we're all, because we talk continuously, in this moment of there really is no place else to go. There's no more revolving accounts that are going to cover what we need. This is probably the first time that I've been in, I wouldn't say a state of panic, but a little bit of desperation.
So thank you all for coming today. So I just want to remind everybody that November 5th is election day. And I know that also, I mean, ballots will start to be mailed out, correct?
Yes.
For those who
We've
are
already got
mail-
in the mail-in ballots, and then October 19th, early voting starts.
Okay,
you
so
can
that's
vote in town
important for
hall.
folks to know that. And so if you may have gotten a ballot in your mail today, if that's the direction you chose, or this week coming up, make sure that you fill it out, make sure you do all of the process. It's November 5th. Anything else you guys want to, before we conclude,
Well,
touch base?
You know, I
Mr.
think it's-
President?
Well, a couple of things. We're expecting.
Been awful
over-
quiet here.
I
No,
know.
go ahead.
We're expecting over 9,000 people to turn out for this election. You have the presidential election, you have an override question, you have a lot of important topics. You know, I think it's extremely important to realize, you know, people say you've had an influx of cash from COVID money, right? Many communities use that for reoccurring expenses. We were incredibly fortunate. Lisa did a great job in managing it. We did have to use some of it towards the end for reoccurring expenses, but most of that money was used for one-time expenses, whether it went to technology or infrastructure needs or whatever it happened to be. So that even helped us a little bit further. You know, we talked about what if it's no, right? And we talked about how it's one community, and you know, we talked about property values, but again, it's about the kids, it's about our future. And I always think about, I look now at the ATC school, right? And on the side of it, when it used to be the Willis School, there was a plaque on the side of the building that we specifically cut out and put it in the side of the building of the ATC. And it says that the future of our nation depends on its youth. And it's not a better saying out there. And this is, you know, not about me or not about you, it's about our future. And you want to be proud of the community you live in. It is the number one thing I would think if anyone's coming to our community, they're looking at your school system, right? They're looking at what we have to offer. There are expenses that, you know, could be affected by this, right? We look at user fees, and a lot of people assume user fees pay for sports, right? User fees don't even pay 25% of sports. Sports cost of roughly $800,000 in Winthrop. User fees account for about $160,000 of that. We also, through the town, pay for the vocational school too, which is an incredible benefit for the children of our school. Upwards of 70 children are able to go there. they're building a new school, right? The cost of that, we know how that goes. So we're going to be spending in the next 2 years upwards of $1.5 million a year to give our children the ability to go to a great school, and it's so needed for so many kids. And I'm very proud to be part of that community that is able to send their kids at the vocational school. But it's just such an important topic right now. You know, we're available, the three of us are available anytime. Reach out to somebody. And again, I tell people all the time, just vote informed. Understand what you're voting for. There are limitations that people have that there's nothing we could do about that, and we respect that. But just vote informed. Understand why there's a need, understand where the money's going, and understand what we're trying to do to prevent future requests in a short period of time.
What's the website, Lisa, that
So
they could go
the
on?
Winthrop Public Schools website is www.winthrop.k12.ma.us. If you go onto that website, I encourage anyone who has any questions. We have a couple of public forums that are posted on our Facebook page, posted on the town's website. But go on to our school website and find my name, which you can easily find, and send me an email. I can talk about budget for a long time, and I can be somewhat annoying about it. But if there's a question that you have, you know, like Mr. Lettiere said, please go to the polls informed. Don't go with assumptions, because 90% of the time your assumption is because you heard it somewhere. If you want the facts and you want to know, our budget is posted, our reduced level service budget is posted on our website, but we do have a level service budget that I can share with anybody who requests, and any questions you have.
We'll make
we
sure
will
the
answer.
website's posted on this.
Great, great.
So, and I know that, Mr. Town Manager, you have a wonderful weekly newsletter that comes out every week. I get that. I mean, it's so easy to subscribe to it. You want to take 2 seconds to tell people, if they are watching this who don't do that, how they do that?
Yeah, they can sign up on the website. It goes out weekly. If you just put your email address in, we can mail it out to everybody, or you can just get it on the website. There's a link
And
right
the
on the front
website
page.
is?
www.winthropma.gov.
Okay, and we'll make sure
Nice
that
and
that's on
simple,
too.
yeah.
Because I do find your weekly, I think it's on Thursdays.
Yes,
comes
it comes out
weekly.
Thursday, yep.
It's great. It has not
Yeah.
just about town, but all stuff about Winthrop,
Yeah.
which really has been very helpful.
Lots of community events on there too.
Right,
So,
right.
yeah.
So thank you all for coming down today and talking about this. And as I want to say, as we close to the public, November 5th is a really big, important day, not just for nationally, but it's also for our local town. It's important that you get out there, you go out and you vote. It's important, if you have a mail-in ballot or if you want to vote early, that you follow those dates. But more importantly, you vote. And that's the bottom line here. So we hope that this information has helped you become an informed voter. And as my colleagues have said, if you have any questions or any comments that you'd like to make, please reach out. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you.
Thank you,
And,
John.
have a great day.
Thank you, John.